It is the year 1979. The Van Buren family has just arrived from the great metropolis of New York City after a cheating scandal between Gary Van Buren and his wife Melanie. Melanie had been seeing another man for the past few months, and he had come to this revelation through a sudden conversation in the middle of the night. They are attempting to rekindle their relationship, and as a result, they've moved to a beautiful old mansion on Long Island's South Shore. It seems like the perfect home for the Van Burens and their three young children, and maybe it's a way to bring their marriage back into full swing. However, something far more sinister is going on. This is the story of that house and the Van Buren family, and how, by the end, they were fighting for their own lives past any certain simple family conflict. We will go into the backstory of this property, we'll go into the future of this property, and we'll go into how these people were placed into a far more deadly situation than they could have ever imagined. One that delves into the supernatural. Maybe ghosts are real. This is Ghost House, the full documentary by Larson Weimer. To understand the dark, sinister evil that takes place in this house, we must first go back to 1797. This is the same place, South Long Island, where an unknown woman was burned at the stake after the accusations that she was a witch. They didn't do anything to hear her claims. She was not given a fair trial. She was simply burned. And this was viewed by many. And after the ceremony had left, everyone had set off, but one man remained to give his grievances. This man's name was Jacob Armand, a local sailor. This situation broke him entirely, as that woman was his long-lost lover, who he'd been trying to get with his entire life. After she'd been taken from him, he quickly spiraled into depression and seemingly vanished from that day. And this was only one of many strange happenings that would follow soon after. Fast forward to the mid-1940s. The house has been fully constructed and completed. Several owners have stayed, although none have resided more than a few years. There has been reported strange happenings at the house, including the eyewitness statement of Helen Jennings, a local neighbor. She was in her young youth at the time when she apparently looked towards the house and saw a man running his fingers through his hair. She tried to interact with the man. He seemingly vanished without a trace, scaring the lights out of her, leaving her scarred for the rest of her life. She constantly refers to these paranormal happenings at this house, however, no one has believed her. It is around this time that a family composing of three young boys, a mother, and the father moves in. This is during the World War II era, so times are a bit rough, but the family is making do with what be. However, things immediately go sour. Seemingly out of nowhere, the husband of this family falls to his death from the top floor. It is a rapid event. It happens with seemingly no correspondence or succession. The woman can do nothing about it, but simply continue attempting to support her three children alone. She takes up all the household chores, attempts to get a job, and does everything she can for the three boys. And it seems like life may be returning to normal, but they keep seeing strange apparitions and occurrences. The children had a nursery room up in the attic of the house, which they had been living in together so the mother could keep an eye on them. Through this room, they received strange visions, strange dreams. They would see a man sailing across an open ocean in their nightmares, screaming at them to go away. However, they seemingly didn't believe that these were actual warnings. They passed them off as their imagination. On a seemingly peaceful night in the 1940s, the remaining sole woman of the household awoke to the sound of burning and the smell of smoke. She went upstairs and found that entire nursery just completely aflame, her three children on fire as they screamed at her. She ran downstairs and attempted to grab the fire extinguisher, but it was no use. By the time she returned, she seemingly tripped and fell and was incapacitated, and all three children passed away as a result. The fire seemingly did not spread outside the nursery for reasons unknown, and the woman testifies that afterward she awoke to being returned to her bed and seemingly being coerced to remain there while this occurred. She was trapped in the house in this psychological torment for a span of 4 days before she seemingly snapped back to reality and escaped. And past that point, she claims that a ghost had killed her children, although she was deemed as crazy and nothing ever came of the case. The house was closed off for a few years before eventually being reopened to human settlement, although not many homeowners have returned since that point. Fast forward to 1979. Gary Van Buren and Melanie Van Buren, a couple from the original New York metropolitan area, takes themselves and their 3 kids and moves into his beautiful South Long Island home. They are suffering from family conflict as Melanie Van Buren has been involved in an affair with another man, in which it led to the entire family fearing for her safety as the man began harassing her after she broke things off. They are attempting to start anew and repair their relationship, although they have no idea of any sinister happenings that have occurred at the house. The small town surrounding them is seemingly nice. They have no problems with their neighbors, although the now elderly Helen Jellings does scare them due to her strange habits in which she stares out the window towards their household daily and seemingly attempts to warn them of some sort of paranormal entity which they don't believe, although they have experienced some strange occurrences. Gary Van Buren notably was pushed down when he was attempting to look at his wife's art gallery in one of the upstairs bedroom by some invisible force. Another time, he apparently bruised his neck and fell down the stairs with seemingly no cause. The family is concerned, but they don't pass it off to anything paranormal. In fact, they seemingly ignore this and they believe it to be an actual person, hence Melanie's secret lover, which she broke things off with. Gary Van Buren even accuses her of harboring him in the house, which she denies. They eventually decide to go to police to confront them about this incident. And this is when, throughout these happenings, they meet another woman by the name of Janice Lohr. Melanie Van Buren had gone to a park to cool off her head. They were planning on filing a police report soon and launching an investigation on the man that she'd secretly had an affair with the month prior. But she was really feeling the effects of her family conflict, and she needed a breather. While she was at this park, she met up with 2 other women, specifically a woman about her age by the name of Janice Lohr, who had served as a local librarian in the town. She was extremely intelligent and kind towards Melanie, and they quickly kindled a small relationship, and she promised to return her to the house and show her around. However, around the same time, Helen Jellings, guided by her caretaker, suddenly arrived and began warning both of them that there was a seemingly dangerous entity inside the house. Both of them immediately became defensive, especially Janice, who ushered her out with the instructions to her caretaker not to let her in her sight again. After that encounter, the 2 women returned to the house, and she seemingly showed Janice around, and Janice enjoyed the property in turn. She met the children, and all seemed well. And around that same time, they went to the police for their first report. 2 officers, notably one being named Tony DiMaggio, set off to go take a look at the property. They found nothing amiss, but they said they would investigate the man that Melanie had been having an affair with, who continued to reside in the New York metropolitan area. Fast forward another week or so. It is early morning when Helen Jellings suddenly appears on the doorstep of Melanie. She is the only one home and quickly answers, and the old woman is accompanied by no one. She seemingly trekked up the property through the driveway, and she seems to be panicked. She tells her that she has a diary owned by a mysterious man, the sailor named Jacob Armand, She says that she must read it as it contains reasons for the paranormal happenings at the house. Mulaney doesn't exactly buy her story. She doesn't believe in her alibi. She simply assumes she is a crazy old lady. However, she does give her credit and takes the journal from her, and she asks her to have a safe morning. That is the last interaction between the two alive. Tragically, Helen Jennings would pass away right in front of their doorstep about 20 minutes later. She was descending through the driveway, and right before she reached the front gate, she suddenly collapsed as if something had lifted her up and slammed her to the floor. Her body wouldn't be found until 2 days later when the children were walking towards the bus stop or school and had approached the front of the property and found the rapidly decomposing woman. Police were once again called to dispose of the body and investigate, and they believe foul play may have been involved, noted by the bruising on her neck and the multiple fractures to her spine. They continue to investigate the secret lover of Mulaney, although they can't figure out his whereabouts for whatever reason or another. Eventually, Gary decides to investigate, and he himself drives the miles it takes to get to the New York metropolitan area. And eventually, he discovers that through that man's landlord that he had actually electrocuted himself to death in the bathtub by accident when he had dropped his electric shaver. This leaves Gary confused, as this happened several weeks ago, and the police had already noted of this. So who could possibly be behind the things occurring at the house? He finally begins to lean towards maybe that there is something far more deeper and sinister. Then, on a cold winter night, the two officers dispatched earlier, one notably being named Tony DiMaggio, return to the house for another investigation. They decide they want to question the family about the relationship they had with Helen Jennings and to see what exactly prompted her to be at the house at the time. While they're there, Janice Lors also appears for reasons unknown, although it is believed that she came due to a seemingly bad gut feeling that the family was in danger. While the officers are discussing with the three adults present at the scene what is going on, they begin to hear screams upstairs from the three children. They run upstairs to find that the oldest daughter is shrouded in flames, with her entire bed being lit. The officers quickly rush up and down the stairs carrying water buckets along with the three adults, and they desperately try to put out the fire. And once they do so, they hear another scream, and they find that the middle child, the son, also has his bed aflame. The entire situation seems extremely bizarre, and Janice Lors quickly agrees to rush down to the station to get backup, while the two officers continue to work. The sergeant remains inside while Tony DiMaggio runs out to his truck to see if he can find any other tools that could help the situation. As he's opening his car hood, Janice Lors testifies that as she was pulling backward out of the driveway, she saw a man walk up behind him, but she immediately became petrified and sped up and left the property. Following this, the car hood was slammed down on Tony DiMaggio's spine, killing him instantly. Unaware of this, the other adults continued to fight the flames in the house before eventually putting the fire out, rescuing all three children without any severe burns. They were transported to the hospital for the night, but they were released upon the revelation that they had not been seemingly injured by the flames, almost as if they were an illusion. Past this point, Janice Lors is investigated for the sudden murder of Tony DiMaggio based upon her eyewitness testimony. Although she gives a clear statement, and the police have no evidence to incriminate her or anyone else present at the scene, they conclude that there may be a man attempting to stalk the property, and they keep their eye on the case, although not much happens past this point. However, it is noted that the following night, Mulaney Van Buren is with her children, and she goes up to the attic where she sees the burned out nursery from the 1940s, which has remained in the same condition prior as it was in the house. She apparently saw the ghostly apparitions of three old young boys with the burns still present on them, which led her to scream. The officers posted at her house patrolling the area went in and calmed her down, and they investigated, finding the nursery in the same exact position as she had found it, but finding no evidence of any apparition. This possibly concurs that there may have been some psychological event going on, although neither of the officers concluded that, and the case was left open as all police presence left the house. For a while, it seemed like everything may return to normal. There had been no concerning incidents for a couple days, although one fateful night, Janice Lors decided to return to the property to give her condolences and reconnect with Mulaney. This is when things went sour. Janice Lors was about 20 feet from the front doorstep when suddenly she stopped her car as she seen something on the side of the driveway running away from the car. She exited the vehicle, and as she walked towards the source of the shadow, something seemingly got in her car and reversed it down the hill. She attempted to chase after it, but it was no use, and it smashed into the bottom of the property, just completely being destroyed and annihilated. Watching her car crash, she quickly became fearful and attempted to run towards the front door. However, she was seemingly stopped by some entity. This was when all contact was lost with Janice Lors. Meanwhile, inside the house, Mulaney was attempting to negotiate the situation between her husband, in which they had gotten into an argument about the strange apparitions. Mulaney is convinced there is something paranormal going on, as she's read the diary provided to her by Helen Jellings and concluded that Jacob Armand is the ghost haunting the house. However, Gary is still insistent that something else may be going on, possibly tied to his jealousy over the affair. While the two are arguing, Janice suddenly comes to the door, and Mulaney goes to answer it. Gary heads upstairs, and this is when things go extremely, extremely wrong. As Janice goes inside, Mulaney notices that she's in a disheveled state. She's covered in sweat, she's bleeding, and she appears like she's been in some sort of struggle. She's also acting extremely erratic, talking about how Jacob Armand had given up her soul and how she was one with him. When Mulaney was trying to negotiate with her and understand what was going on, her middle son suddenly ran down the stairs and said that her husband was fighting something invisible. She followed him upstairs and found her husband seemingly throwing punches in the air as something slammed him to the floor and was grabbing him by the neck. As he struggled, she tried to reach out to him, but he was smashed through the top bay window and fell onto the trash cans about 30 feet below with a sickening thud. Through this point, Mulaney assumed that her husband was dead, killed by the ghostly apparition. It was fully true to a full extent. Her house was haunted, and now her kids were being threatened. Meanwhile, while an officer was on patrol, he noticed that the house was seemingly emanating strange noises. It sounded like there was some sort of struggle going on. He could hear distant screaming, and some of the lights were flickering on the upstairs windows. He quickly pulled into the driveway and began ascending the property, where he saw a flash of the children and their mother running into the forest. He quickly called for backup, sensing that there was a disturbance at the property, and he quickly began to follow the incident. It is there when he returned to the backside of the house and found the broken up body of Gary Van Buren, who had fallen 30 feet and broken his neck. However, he was still alive, and he was actively calling out for help, despite being in shock. Meanwhile, Mulaney Van Buren had seemingly run all the way out to the beach, where she found her daughter tied to a stake. It is seemed that Jacob Armand was attempting to kill her the same way his lover had died, as a sort of act of jealousy and revenge. However, at that moment, Mulaney seemingly managed to free her daughter, and as they stood there, suddenly strange apparitions began to occur, and they saw Jacob Armand for the first time in person. Still in his 1790s sailor outfit, he appeared the same as he did once before, and a look of tragedy and heartbreak could be seen over him. He may have had sinister intentions, but all of his futile attempts were simply to get back with his lover. At that moment, however, the many ghosts of the property suddenly appeared. All the ones who had died. The three boys, the father of the boys, Helen Jellings, Tony DiMaggio, they all seemingly appeared from nowhere, and it quickly attempted to subdue Jacob Armand. They began dragging him towards the fiery pit, seemingly summoned from nowhere along the beach, when suddenly Mulaney stopped him, because another figure had appeared. It was the same woman who had been burned at the stake so many years prior. She'd returned for her lover. Despite the attempts to send Jacob Armand to eternal damnation, they insisted that he at least be allowed to remain with his lover. Mulaney recounts all this as very surreal and as real as it possibly could get. Meanwhile, additional police units have showed up, and they all also witnessed these strange ghostly spirits standing in front of them, arguing over whether or not to send Jacob Armand to hell, or to allow him to return to his lover. Eventually, Helen Jellings and her spirit finally reach a conclusion. They shall both be sent to hell, but they can remain together. The two embrace in a loving hug before they are sent down into the fiery pit, and the other souls seemingly dissipate. The evil in the property is gone. The officers look along in shock before they eventually take their remaining family members and transport them all to a nearby hospital. It is there when the events of the night are played out. Janice Lors succumbed to her injuries as a result of a severe brain hemorrhage after she was bashed over the head. She was dead. However, Gary Van Buren manages to survive, despite having a broken neck. He will be paralyzed from the waist down for several years to come. The three children are mostly uninjured, and Mulaney is suffering from severe mental trauma, although she quickly recovers. The family is released back to their home after a few months, and while their lives have been completely altered forever, they're seemingly free of evil. As for the police department itself involved in the case, they decided to unanimously cover things up. It would be impossible to explain a paranormal experience to the general public that all initiated these deaths and this torment. There would simply not be enough public support to back it, and the situation would quickly be born and exploded out of proportion. As a result, they decided to blame the entire incident upon Janice Lors, framing her as a psychopath that had attacked the family, which resulted in her own death and Gary's injury. Above all, we can all conclude that Ghost House is not a true story. It was fabricated as part of a novel. Although it was very important to note that a deeper meaning was attempting to be achieved here, which is that, above all, love does sustain, even through the depths of horror, trauma, and torment. Jacob Armand did everything he possibly could to achieve love, although it came at the extent of death, heartbreak, torment, and far other negative emotions and connotations. I think this truly establishes the fact that love is not something set in stone. It is not something easily achieved. It is something that needs to be reevaluated within one's life. It is something that could be turned into something deadly. It is something that could be turned into something sinister. It is something that brings the deepest sense of eeriness, terror, and horror to oneself, which is why Ghost House could have been a tragic love story, but was then transformed into more of a dark horror through the extent of someone's heartbreak and longing for a love life. While all may seem quiet at the Van Buren household, and the family continues to recover, there is one sinister energy still brewing, however. The disembodied soul of Janice Lors, now hell-bent on revenge, has taken the place of Jacob Armand, and is keen to do the same damage that he once did. Her main target is Mulaney Van Buren. That's where the story ends.